Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take complex source material, break it down, and give you that strategic shortcut to really being well-informed.
That's right.
And today, we're tackling a really big one, a demanding topic. The doctrine of offensive operations.
Yeah, this is foundational stuff. We're diving into how modern forces actually plan to fight, how they plan to win. And, the manuals themselves, they really stress that understanding the offense takes, well, a lot of critical thinking at every single level.
Right. We're not just skimming definitions today.
No. We're looking at the trade-offs, the tough decisions commanders face when they actually execute these plans.
Okay, so our mission for you listening is to give you that necessary understanding. We're digging into the core ideas from two key sources. Excerpts from Field Manual 3.0 Operations, the March 2025 version.
The latest one, yeah.
And Field Manual 390 Tactics, which is from May 2023. We really want to unlock the strategic thinking, those defining characteristics, and the specific types of operations that make up the attack.
And the big idea, the sort of guiding star for this whole discussion, comes straight from Field Manual 3.0. It states, essentially, that the offense is your most direct way to seize the initiative, keep it, and then exploit it.
Seize, retain, exploit.
Exactly. The offense isn't just, pushing forward. It's the fundamental engine of winning.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Ground zero, the definition. When we talk about offensive operations, what's the real strategic intent baked into that term?
Okay, so Field Manual 3.0 puts it pretty plainly. An offensive operation is designed to defeat or destroy enemy forces, and also, crucially, to gain control of terrain, resources, and population centers.
So it's about destruction and control.
Yes. But the absolute core purpose is for the commander to impose their will on the enemy. You force the opponent to react to your moves, not the other way around.
And imposing your will, that sounds like it needs to be pretty dynamic, right? Fast and decisive.
Oh, absolutely. The doctrine describes these operations using words like sudden action, speed, surprise, shock. It's all directed at enemy weaknesses.
To force them onto the back foot.
Precisely. The immediate goal is to make them react defensively. And that reaction, very often, creates even bigger weaknesses or new ones that the attacking force has to be poised, absolutely ready to exploit instantly.
Right. The doctrine seems really insistent that you can't just stop after you win the first fight.
No, pausing is dangerous. It's basically handing the initiative right back to the enemy.
So a tactical victory isn't the end game.
Not at all. It's the start. Field Manual 3.0 stresses that Army forces must rapidly follow up that initial success with tactical exploitations and pursuits. These aren't optional extras.
They're built-in follow-on actions.
They are. They're specifically designed to expand the destruction, break the enemy's cohesion, make sure that defeat is final so they can't just regroup and come back at you effectively.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. The context for all this, especially in the 2025 manual, is multi-domain operations. So if the goal is seizing initiative, how does the offense work in this, well, much more complex multi-domain world?
That's a huge shift. Multi-domain operations mean you have to constantly synchronize or coordinate or even integrate capabilities across all the domains.
Land, maritime, air.
Space, and cyberspace. All of them working together to defeat a capable peer adversary. It's a recognition that, you can't win on the ground if you've already lost in the electromagnetic spectrum or in cyber.
So the goal isn't just taking a hill anymore. The maneuver itself has to create specific advantages, right? 3 types.
That's right. You need to generate physical, information, and human advantages, often all at the same time.
Okay, let's break those down. Physical advantage seems straightforward.
It's the most tangible, yeah.
Right.
It's about seizing the initiative in, say, numbers of troops or quality of equipment, or maybe getting into a better geographical position, like grabbing that key airfield or using long-range fires to disrupt an enemy column. It's the material edge.
And information advantage.
Yeah.
That sounds like more than just keeping communications secure.
Oh, much more. It's about having the initiative in understanding the situation better than the enemy, making decisions faster, and influencing how relevant actors behave.
Influencing behavior. How?
Well, imagine using cyber tools to degrade the enemy's spy satellites, or running a sophisticated deception operation to make them think you're attacking north when you're actually going south.
Ah, I see. So you gain the information advantage, and they literally can't figure out what's real.
Exactly. It cripples their ability to make good decisions, to act decisively.
Okay, that leaves the human dimension. The manual says this is where perception and decision-making happen.
And this is probably the trickiest one. It's about human will. Because physical actions, especially violence, done with speed and precision, they have huge cognitive effects.
Psychological impact.
Right. A successful offense doesn't just target the enemy's tanks, it targets their will to fight. So by combining that lethal physical punch with clever deception in the information space, commanders aim to shock the enemy force, demoralize them, basically convince them that fighting back is pointless.
Wow. Okay, so orchestrating all of that across all these domains, that really connects the tactical fight to the bigger strategy. Field Manual 3.0 calls the operational level the bridge, right?
That's a vital concept. Look, tactical units might win a specific battle, capture a town, but the operational level's job is to make sure that tactical win actually contributes to the larger strategic goals, the political outcomes you need.
So every raid, every assault has to be thought about in terms of the whole campaign.
Every single one. Leaders have to constantly ask, how does this action help achieve the desired political end state? Is this offensive push contributing strategically?
Okay, let's touch on the principles of war quickly. Obviously, the principle of offensive is central here, but you mentioned there's a modern twist.
Yeah, the nuance is how broad it is now. The principle of offensive isn't just for tanks rolling forward. It applies to everything Army forces do in every domain. That includes the human dimension, the information dimension we just talked about.
So always be proactive.
Always. The doctrine demands commanders keep an offensive mindset even when you're technically in competition or crisis, below the threshold of actual war. Always keep the adversary off balance.
And what about mass or concentration? That's changed too, hasn't it, with long-range threats?
It really has. It's less about piling up tanks and troops in one spot, which is just asking for trouble these days. It's about massing effects.
Effect, meaning
Integrating all your combat power fires, cyber, infantry, air support, everything, and synchronizing how they hit a decisive point all at once. That synchronized effect, the doctrine calls it convergence, that's what lets even a smaller force achieve a big outcome.
so bringing different capabilities together at the right time and place.
Precisely. The effect is way greater than just the sum of the parts.
But there's a big but here, isn't there, about concentrating the actual forces.
Huge but. You still need to concentrate forces for that close-in fight to get local superiority. But that concentration has to be incredibly brief. Fleeting, almost.
Because they become a target.
A massive, juicy target for enemy long-range missiles or artillery. So modern offensive maneuver is more like concentrate quickly, hit hard, then disperse immediately to survive, then repeat.
Which makes the principle of surprise even more vital.
Absolutely essential. Hitting the enemy when, where, or how they least expect it. Field Manual 390 is really clear. Surprise lets the attacker seize control. It messes up the enemy's ability to figure out what's happening or how to respond effectively.
And if they can't react properly,
Your forces can break through their defenses with hopefully far fewer casualties. It's a massive force multiplier.
Okay, let's move on to the core characteristics. Field Manual 390 lays out four that really define how the offense is executed. They seem pretty interconnected. Let's start with audacity. That sounds bold.
It is. Audacity is basically a measure of boldness, but also a willingness to accept calculated risk. Success in the offense demands imagination, yes, but also that relentless drive and, frankly, the guts to act boldly when you see an opportunity.
But it's not just being reckless, right?
No, it's calculated daring, not just rolling the dice randomly.
And the doctrine links this to leadership, doesn't it? How does that audacity filter down through the ranks?
Yeah, it relies heavily on what the Army calls mission command. Commanders have to empower their subordinates. They set the intent, the goal, but they have to delegate the acceptance of risk down the chain.
So subordinates need to feel they can take initiative.
Exactly. A successful culture is one where subordinates are encouraged to be aggressive within that commander's intent, and where honest mistakes made in good faith aren't punished harshly. If people are afraid to take risks, the whole operation just slows down, loses its punch, loses that audacity.
Okay, second characteristic, concentration. We touched on this with mass, but here it's about applying that combined power against decisive points. This feels like where the plan hits the ground.
It really is. Look, if a commander tries to attack everywhere at once, or spreads their forces too thin across too many objectives without focusing resources, well, they dilute their combat power. They won't get that decisive punch they need.
So focus is key.
Concentration ensures that everything you have available, cyber effects, artillery, infantry, engineers, everything, is focused on that one specific point, the one that will guarantee you breakthrough or achieve the mission.
Third characteristic, Surprise. We know it's important, but achieving it seems like it requires a lot of careful work beforehand, making sure the enemy truly doesn't see it coming.
Oh, it does. Surprise often comes from good deception planning, really tight operational security,
Yeah.
not leaking your intentions, and leveraging that multi-domain environment we talked about.
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine launching your ground assault, but at the exact same moment, you use cyber capabilities to temporarily disable the enemy's communication satellites. Or maybe you jam their command network.
So you multiply the effects.
Exponentially. The enemy isn't just surprised by the tanks, they're suddenly blind and deaf too.
Yeah.
It turns their tactical problem into a paralyzing crisis for their commander. They can't react effectively.
Right. Okay, the fourth one, tempo. This one feels a bit more abstract. It's defined as the relative speed and rhythm of operations.
Yeah, and this is really critical to understand properly. Tempo is not just about going fast. It's not how quickly your vehicles can drive down a road.
The relative speed.
It's speed relative to the threat. Field Manual 3.0 really hammers this home. The goal is to understand the situation, make a decision, and then act faster and more effectively than the enemy can.
So if you plan faster than they anticipate.
You've achieved a high tempo. Even if your tanks only moved a few kilometers, if you took 5 hours to plan and execute something that the enemy needed 10 hours to react to, you're winning the tempo battle.
So maintaining tempo is really about outthinking and outacting the enemy, a cognitive race.
That's such a great way to put it. It's a cognitive race. Commanders constantly have to judge which kind of relative advantage matters most right now. Is it physical speed? Is it decision speed? Is it speed in disrupting their information flow? Any action you take has to create that advantage relative to what the enemy is doing or can do.
Okay, that idea of synchronizing speed and effects, it leads us straight into convergence. You mentioned it earlier as the engine of multi-domain operations.
It really is. Convergence is about integrating Army capabilities with joint capabilities, Air Force, Navy, etc., at the most effective level, whether that's division, corps, or even higher, and then synchronizing how all those capabilities are employed against those decisive points we talked about.
The goal being
To create effects that complement and reinforce each other, effects the enemy simply cannot counter effectively all at once, which then allows your maneuver forces to exploit the situation.
And the real power here seems to be creating a kind of positive feedback loop, a cycle of opportunity.
Exactly. When convergence works well, your initial success makes the enemy react, and that reaction often exposes new vulnerabilities, maybe in a different domain or maybe a physical weakness.
Which gives you another opening.
Another opening to hit them again, maybe with a different combination of capabilities. It creates this expanding cycle of opportunity, but it really hinges on the higher commander's skill in synchronizing very specific targets with the broader objectives, coordinating across their own units and with joint partners. It's complex orchestration.
And when that orchestration works, you achieve the ultimate aim, imposing multiple dilemmas on the enemy.
That's the gold standard for the offense. You want to put the enemy commander in a position where they have to choose between multiple equally bad options all at the same time. Like maybe they have to move their reserves to stop your attack on their left flank. But they know if they do that, it exposes a critical supply hub on their right flank to your long-range fires or air attack.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
That's the idea. You seize the initiative, force them onto the defensive mentally and physically. And you achieve this through hitting them simultaneously, deep, across multiple domains, often using deception to confuse them even further.
There's a specific technique mentioned that seems to embody this relentless pressure. Defeating in detail.
Right. Defeating in detail is basically concentrating overwhelming force against separate, isolated parts of the enemy's formation, rather than trying to take on their entire force at once.
Divide and conquer, essentially?
Kinda, yeah. Traditionally, it was used by smaller forces, but Field Manual 3.0 applies it more broadly now. You might focus all your effort on defeating, say, just one specific enemy function, like their air defenses. Or maybe you target one specific capability or one echelon, or focus on defeating them in just one domain, like cyber, to enable success elsewhere.
So it could mean taking out their air defense network with electronic warfare and missiles before you even send your own aircraft in.
Exactly. It requires almost surgical precision. You have to prioritize ruthlessly.
Okay, before we jump into the specific types of offensive ops, let's talk about the reserve. That force held back. Why is it so critical in an offensive plan?
The reserve is that portion of your force that you deliberately hold out of the initial action. It's there to be committed at a decisive moment. It gives the commander flexibility.
Flexibility to do what?
Well, maybe exploit an unexpected success, like if the enemy collapses faster than you thought. Or, just as importantly, to prevent a sudden setback from turning into a total disaster. It's the commander's insurance policy, in a way.
And committing it is often called the commander's toughest decision. Why is that?
Because it's usually their last major uncommitted combat power. Once they commit the reserve, its actions typically become the main effort, or at least reinforce it heavily. The commander is essentially placing their biggest bet.
All the chips in.
Pretty much. And it's also tied to that tempo we discussed. If things go wrong and the commander has to commit the reserve just to stabilize the situation, they risk losing all the initiative they fought so hard to gain while that reserve force moves and gets into the fight.
Right.
The timing is absolutely critical.
And the doctrine says once it's committed, you immediately need to think about creating a new one.
Immediately. Both Field Manual 3.0 and 390 are clear on this. As soon as that reserve is committed, the commander has to start scraping together another one, maybe from forces that haven't been engaged yet, or by pulling troops from areas that seem less threatened. You just can't operate effectively for long without that bit of flexibility, that backstop.
Okay, let's get into the tactical execution now. The four specific types of offensive operations, they often happen in sequence, right? Starting with movement to contact.
That's right. Movement to contact is all about developing the situation. You're trying to establish contact with the enemy or maybe regain it if you've lost it. And crucially, you want to make that initial contact with the smallest possible friendly element.
Why the smallest element?
So that the main body, the bulk of your force, doesn't blunder into the enemy unprepared or on unfavorable terms. The whole point is to find the enemy, figure out their disposition, and then commit your main force under the best possible conditions.
So it sounds very focused on intelligence gathering, using that lead element almost like a pro.
It really is. The organization for a movement to contact relies heavily on a strong forward security element. That element is critical for protecting the main body and ensuring that when contact happens, it's on your terms, not theirs.
The element of surprise here isn't about the contact itself, but what happens next.
Exactly. The surprise comes later, in the timing and direction of the main attack, which is shaped by what that forward security element discovers.
Now, Field Manual 390 brings up a challenge here. The frontage dilemma. Covering a wide area versus a narrow one. How does a commander decide?
Yeah, that's a classic command decision. It's all about risk versus reward, and it usually hinges on how good your intelligence is.
Okay.
The dilemma is, do you advance on a narrow front that keeps your combat power concentrated, ready for a potentially tough fight if you hit the enemy head on, or do you advance on a wider front?
Which increases your chances of finding them.
Right. It increases the likelihood of making contact somewhere, and it reduces the risk that you might accidentally bypass the enemy entirely, leave them in your rear. But the downside is your force is dispersed when contact happens.
So if you're not sure where the enemy is, you might spread out more, accepting a weaker initial punch just to make sure you find them.
That's often the calculation. If intel is shaky, go wider, prioritize finding them, but accept the risk of being a bit spread out initially. If you're pretty confident about their location, go narrower, maximize your hitting power upon contact. That choice really dictates the initial tempo and how the fight unfolds.
There's also a variation called search and attack. When is that used?
Search and attack comes into play when the enemy is really dispersed, maybe operating like insurgents or highly mobile, or if the terrain is super complex, like dense jungle or mountains.
Then how does it work?
Basically, your subordinate units operate more independently within assigned areas. They're searching for the enemy and attacking any forces they find that are within their capability to handle.
Sounds like it needs tight control.
Extremely tight control measures, and really reliable, secure communications. Because you have multiple friendly units moving around, potentially converging on the same enemy contact, you absolutely have to prevent fratricide, friendly fire incidents as those elements close in.
Okay, moving on. The second type, the attack. This is the main event, right? Deliberate, decisive action.
This is it. The attack. It usually involves a series of advances and assaults. And this is where those characteristics we talked about, audacity, tempo, really come to the fore. Commanders have to be ready to shift their main effort, seize opportunities, exploit momentum as soon as it appears.
No sticking rigidly to the plan if the situation changes.
Absolutely not. You can't afford to delay just to keep your units in perfect formation or wait for a timetable that the enemy's actions have already made irrelevant. Initiative is key.
A crucial part of setting up a successful attack is isolating the objective. What does that involve?
Isolation means preventing the target enemy force from getting help, No reinforcements, no resupply, not even critical intelligence updates. And this is very much a multi-domain task now.
How so?
Well, you use lethal effects, fires, to physically cut them off, block roads, destroy bridges. But non-lethal effects are just as vital. Using electronic warfare to jam their command radios or their fire control radars, for example, that can effectively isolate them from the rest of their network without blowing anything up.
Okay. And the doctrine talks about specific forms of maneuver for the attack. Which one is preferred?
The envelopment is generally the preferred form. An envelopment attacks an enemy's flank or maybe swings around to their rear. It deliberately avoids smashing head-on into their strongest defenses where they've likely concentrated their firepower and obstacles.
Why is that better?
Because it forces the enemy to fight in two or more directions at once. It immediately creates a dilemma for them, splits their attention, and significantly increases your chances of achieving surprise and breaking their position.
So what about the frontal attack,
Yeah.
the head-on assault? When would you do that? It sounds costly.
It usually is the most costly. A frontal attack is generally only used when there really isn't a vulnerable flank to attack, or maybe if the commander absolutely has to keep pressure on the enemy's front to hold them in place, to fix them.
Fixing them for another attack elsewhere.
Exactly. Maybe a larger operation is trying to envelop them, and your job is just to pin them down. But unless you have overwhelming combat power compared to the defender, or that specific fixing purpose, you generally avoid a frontal attack.
Makes sense. Okay, so the attack succeeds, objectives are taken. What's next? That leads to the third type, exploitation.
Right. Exploitation kicks in immediately after a successful attack. The goal is to keep the momentum going, build on that success. You want to prevent the enemy forces you just beat from getting organized again, setting up a new defense, or just recovering from the shock.
So it's all about speed and ruthlessness.
Absolutely. Relentless speed, maintaining that pressure. Don't give them a chance to breathe.
And this seems like another area where subordinate leaders really need to step up.
Huge emphasis on initiative here. Field Manual 390 says subordinate commanders must use their initiative to launch exploitations, acting within the higher commander's overall intent. They shouldn't sit around waiting for explicit orders if they see a chance to push on and shatter the retreating enemy.
So the best case is the attacking unit just keeps rolling right into an exploitation.
That's the ideal. Capitalize immediately. Now, if the enemy manages to pull back in some sort of order, that's when your information collection, your recon, has to go into overdrive. You need to find where those fragments are going, regain that situational understanding fast.
Okay, which brings us to the fourth and final type, pursuit. This sounds like the final nail in the coffin.
That's exactly what it is. The objective of a pursuit is the total destruction of a fleeing enemy force. And the doctrine is really specific here, just harassing them, picking off stragglers, hitting their supply lines. That's not enough.
It has to be destruction.
Complete destruction as an organized military force. Annihilation.
How do you achieve that against an enemy who's actively running away?
It usually involves a combination of things. You keep direct pressure on the main body that's fleeing, pushing them hard from behind. But at the same time, you launch an enveloping or maybe even an encircling maneuver, trying to get ahead of them, cut off their escape routes.
To trap them.
To fix them in place so they can be destroyed in detail by overwhelming force. And a really critical part of a successful pursuit is dealing with the enemy's reserves, the forces they're probably using to cover their withdrawal, or trying to form a new defensive line further back.
You have to stop those reserves.
You have to identify them, target them, slow them down, fix them, keep them from effectively shielding the main fleeing force. If you can neutralize their rear guard or reserves, the pursuit has a much higher chance of succeeding completely.
All right, these offensive operations, they obviously don't happen in a vacuum. They need a lot of support. Let's talk about the enablers, starting with reconnaissance and security. This really sets the conditions, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. Field Manual 390 actually lays out 7 fundamentals for reconnaissance, so they're like the commandments for intel gathering.
Can you run through them?
Sure. Reconnaissance must be continuous. You never hold your recon assets in reserve. They should always be working. You orient them on the objective. Reporting needs to be rapid and accurate. The recon elements need to retain their own freedom to maneuver. They need to gain and maintain contact with the enemy. And, crucially, develop the situation rapidly once they make contact.
Develop the situation rapidly. That ties back to tempo again.
It does. Every minute lost in figuring out what the recon element has found is a minute the enemy might use to react. Time is initiative.
We've talked about agility and seizing opportunities being key in modern doctrine. That leads to this technique called reconnaissance pull. What is that?
Reconnaissance pull is, well, a very flexible approach. Instead of the plan dictating a specific route for the main force, the reconnaissance elements are sent out to find the path of least
It's
resistance.
like finding gaps or weak spots.
Exactly. They find the gaps, the weak points, maybe an undefended route, and their findings then essentially pull the main body along that path of tactical advantage. It prioritizes seizing opportunities over sticking to a rigid plan.
That sounds like it requires a lot of trust and a very adaptable plan.
It requires immense trust, yes. And the higher commander has to have built multiple options, multiple branches and sequels into their plan from the start. These options are triggered by decision points that depend entirely on what the reconnaissance discovers. You simply can't do reconnaissance pull if your plan is just a single fixed line on a map.
Okay, so that's finding the enemy. What about protecting your own forces? Security operations. Let's walk through the different levels. Screen, guard, and cover.
Right, so the lowest level is a screen. A screen's main job is early warning. It prevents the enemy from just walking up and observing your main force without you knowing. They usually use dispersed observation posts. But, and this is key, a screen does not physically stop the enemy from penetrating.
It just tells you they're coming through.
It's like a tripwire. It alerts you that something's happening.
Okay, stronger than that is the guard.
A guard force is more robust. Its mission is to prevent enemy ground observation and direct fire onto the main body. A guard force has more combat power than a screen, and it will actively fight to keep the enemy away, or at least disrupt them enough so the main force can maneuver safely. If it's guarding an attacking force, it might even conduct some offensive actions itself.
And the highest level of security. Cover.
The cover force does everything a screen and a guard do, but it operates much further out from the main body. Often, a covering force is a significant combined arms task force in its own right, maybe with its own engineers, air defense, artillery support. It's designed to be self-contained and operate semi-independently to shape the environment way out in front or on a flank.
So there's a trade-off, obviously. More security means.
Less combat power available for the main attack, the decisive effort. The commander constantly has to balance how much risk they're willing to accept versus how much combat power they need for the main objective.
Okay, let's switch gears to mobility. Moving those forces, exploiting success, pursuing it, all needs mobility. But what happens when you run into heavy enemy defenses like minefields or concrete barriers?
Yeah, that's when you need a breaching operation. And breaching is one of the most complex and dangerous things you can do in the offense. It has to be meticulously planned and executed, usually following a very specific sequence.
The SOSRA sequence.
That's the one. Suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, and assault. 5 steps, tightly synchronized to get through that obstacle. Suppress enemy fire. Obscure the breach point with smoke. Secure the near and far sides of the breach. Reduce the actual obstacle clear mines. Blow a hole. And finally, assault through the breach to seize the far side.
And you mentioned securing the far side objective is absolutely critical. Why is that so vital?
Think about it. Your engineers, your breaching teams are right out there in the open trying to cut wire or clear mines under fire. They are incredibly vulnerable.
Sitting ducks.
Totally. So the assault force must seize a defined objective on the far side of that obstacle first. They have to eliminate the enemy's direct fire machine guns, anti-tank weapons that can shoot straight into the breach site. If you fail to secure that far side, your follow-on forces trying to push through the narrow lanes created by the engineers could just get wiped out. The breach fails.
Makes sense. Now, counter-mobility, using obstacles yourself, we usually think of that as defensive. How does it fit into the offense?
Well, you use obstacles offensively to achieve defensive effects that support your attack.
Okay, like what?
Like helping to isolate the objective you're attacking. You might use obstacles to block enemy reinforcement routes, or prevent them from easily repositioning forces to counter your main thrust, or simply to protect your flanks as you advance. You're basically shaping the terrain to channel the enemy, or restrict their options, making your own maneuver easier.
And the doctrine mentions a specific obstacle effect often used in the offense, disrupt.
Yes. The disrupt effect aims to use obstacles, usually combined with fires, to break up the enemy's formation, mess with their timing, destroy their cohesion.
Slow them down, make them less organized.
Exactly. Force them to commit their forces piecemeal instead of in a coordinated way. It can also help deceive the enemy about where your real attack is going, or maybe separate their fighting elements from their logistics support.
Which brings us nicely to the final enabler, sustainment and logistics. This underpins everything, right? Operational reach? Endurance?
Absolutely everything. Endurance, as Field Manual 3.0 defines it, is that ability to keep going, to persevere over time and across the whole depth of the operational area. And logistics, sustainment, that's what gives you the operational reach and prolongs that endurance. Good sustainment means freedom of action for the commander.
And given how fast and deep modern offenses are supposed to be, the old way of setting up big, static supply dumps probably doesn't work anymore.
Not really. Logistics has to be just as agile and mobile as the combat forces it's supporting. Sustainment units often need to be task organized right alongside the maneuver units. They need to be able to move quickly, set up distribution points close to the front, keep those turnaround times for critical supplies, fuel, ammo, medical, as short as possible.
Planners need to anticipate needs way ahead of time.
Way ahead. Especially because the main effort might shift rapidly during the fight. You have to predict where the demand will be and get the supplies moving in that direction before the need becomes critical.
And the sheer intensity of offensive combat creates a huge strain, doesn't it?
A massive strain, especially on medical resources. Modern weapons cause devastating injuries. Planners have to anticipate mass casualty events, situations that could overwhelm their organic medics very quickly. You need robust evacuation plans.
And
Fuel consumption goes through the roof. Think about tanks and fighting vehicles maneuvering rapidly over long distances during an exploitation or pursuit. Petroleum, oils, lubricants, the demand skyrockets. And keeping those supply lines open across potentially huge distances under threat is a major challenge.
Okay, so we've covered how to seize the initiative, how to attack, exploit, pursue, but all that effort is kind of wasted strategically if you can't hold on to what you've gained. Doctrine calls this consolidation of gains.
Yeah, and this is really important. Consolidation isn't something you think about after the fighting stops. It has to be deliberately planned right from the beginning, throughout the operation. Field Manual 3 is quite pointed about this. It says early, effective consolidation is actually a form of exploitation. It happens while other operations might still be going on.
So it starts with tactical units securing the ground they just took.
That's the immediate step, yes. Reorganizing, setting up hasty defenses, but it quickly broadens out into a mix of offensive and defensive tasks. You might still be clearing out remaining pockets of enemy resistance. You have to protect the civilian population in the area. And you start conducting what the doctrine calls minimum essential stability tasks.
Like restoring basic services.
Exactly. Getting water running, maybe power, ensuring basic security so civilian life can start to resume. These stability tasks are crucial.
And the big picture goal of all this consolidation and stabilization.
It's to create the conditions for a smooth transition back to legitimate civilian authority, whether that's the host nation government or some other body. That's how you translate the military victory into a lasting, favorable political outcome. Plus, it reduces the burden on your combat forces, freeing them up potentially for other tasks.
Okay, last major topic, managing transitions, like switching from offense to stability operations. The doctrine flags these as points of friction.
They absolutely are. Transitions are inherently tricky because you're shifting the main focus. You're changing tasks, maybe reallocating resources, changing the force posture. It's easy for things to get confused or delayed.
So commanders need to plan for them explicitly.
They have to.
Yeah.
During the planning process, they need to identify where transitions are likely to occur. Offense to defense, offense to stability, maybe defense back to offense. They need to forecast when and how that shift will happen and set up the tasks and task organization to make it as smooth as possible.
And to navigate that friction, that uncertainty during the transition, what's key?
Information. Information collection gets emphasized heavily just before and during any transition. The commander needs to maintain a really detailed, up-to-the-minute understanding of the threat, the environment, the whole situation.
To avoid getting caught off guard while shifting gear.
Exactly. Losing situational awareness is dangerous anytime, but it's especially bad when you're in the middle of changing your mission focus. You have to stay informed to retain the initiative. #outro.
Well, this has been a genuine deep dive into offensive operations. It really underscores just how demanding and integrated the offense is. It's all about that rapid, synchronized application of combat power. We've seen success really hangs on those core characteristics: audacity, concentration, surprise, and especially that idea of relative tempo.
Yes, speed relative to the enemy. And we broke down the tactical execution into those 4 types. Movement to contact to find them, the attack to break them, exploitation to build on success, and pursuit for the final destruction. And underpinning it all is that concept of convergence, using combined arms across all domains to hit the enemy with multiple dilemmas faster than they can possibly react.
We also hit the crucial enablers. Everything from reconnaissance and the security provided by screens, guards, and covers to the absolute necessity of mobility, including complex breaching using that SOSRE sequence, and finally, the agile logistics needed for operational endurance.
So, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. It connects back to that strategic challenge that's really driving a lot of the thinking in the 2025 doctrine. Historically, armies, particularly Western armies, often counted on having a pretty safe rear area, a sanctuary for bringing forces into theater, getting them organized, equipped what's called reception, staging, onward movement, and integration, or RSOI.
But that sanctuary doesn't really exist anymore, does it? Not against a peer adversary with long-range missiles and cyber capabilities.
That's the harsh reality. Those rear areas, the ports, the airfields, the assembly areas, they're now potentially vulnerable from day one across huge distances.
So the provocative question for you to consider is this. How does a force generate and maintain that high relative tempo, that speed and initiative crucial for offensive success, when the very process of getting ready for the fight the RSOI phase is itself continuously contested, potentially under fire, and subject to disruption across every single domain?
That is the challenge. It's an ongoing, really fundamental problem that demands leaders at all levels keep studying, keep thinking critically about doctrine and how to apply it in this much tougher environment. We really encourage you to keep digging into these complex ideas.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this exploration helps inform your own professional thinking and understanding.